John Miller was a loud American man who loved to travel. He was 45 years old with a big smile and an even bigger voice. Back home in Chicago, he owned a car dealership and was known for his funny TV ads. His friends thought he was hilarious, but strangers often found him too much. John didn't care. He liked making people laugh, even if some got upset. This summer, John finally took his dream trip to London. He had always wanted to see the famous places he saw in movies: Big Ben, London Bridge, and most of all, Buckingham Palace. He packed his 2 large suitcases with colorful shirts, shorts, and his favorite baseball cap. His wife Jane decided to stay home. She knew how John could be around new people and didn't want to feel embarrassed. "Just try not to cause trouble," Jane said as she drove him to the airport. "Remember, not everyone gets your jokes." John laughed and kissed her goodbye. "Don't worry so much. The British love a good laugh. They invented humor." The flight to London was long. John talked to everyone around him, whether they wanted to chat or not. He told jokes to the flight attendants and showed pictures of his 3 kids to the man sitting next to him. By the time the plane landed, most people were happy to get away from John. His first day in London was rainy, but John didn't mind. He bought a cheap umbrella from a street vendor and walked around the city. He took pictures of everything and sent them to Jane with funny comments. He ate fish and chips for lunch and thought they were just fancy fish sticks. The waiter didn't smile when John said this. On his second day, the sun came out. John woke up early, excited to see Buckingham Palace. He put on his brightest Hawaiian shirt and his Chicago Cubs cap. The hotel worker at the front desk tried not to stare. "Going to see the Queen's house today," John announced loudly in the hotel lobby. "Do you think she'll invite me in for tea?" He laughed at his own joke. John took the underground train to the palace. He was amazed by how clean the stations were compared to back home. On the train, he noticed people were very quiet. No one talked or made eye contact. This was very different from Chicago. John tried to start conversations, but people just nodded politely and looked away. When he finally reached Buckingham Palace, John was impressed. The building was huge and beautiful. Hundreds of tourists stood behind barriers, taking photos. But what caught John's attention most were the royal guards. They stood perfectly still in their red coats and tall black bearskin hats. Their faces showed no emotion. Their eyes didn't move. It was like they were not real people at all. "Wow," John said to himself. "These guys are something else." He watched the guards for a while, amazed by how they didn't move even when flies landed on their faces or when children made funny faces at them. John had never seen such discipline. A tour group passed by, and John heard the guide explaining that the guards were real soldiers with combat training. They weren't just there to look pretty for tourists. Their job was to protect the royal family. "They stand guard for 2 hours at a time," the guide said. "They are not allowed to move, smile, or react to anything tourists do. It's considered very disrespectful to try to make them laugh or break their focus." John smiled to himself. He loved a good challenge. If there was one thing he was good at, it was getting reactions out of serious people. Back home, he once made the most serious bank manager in town laugh so hard he cried. "Let's see how good these guys really are," John thought, as he moved closer to the nearest guard. John pushed his way through the crowd of tourists. Many people were taking pictures from a safe distance, but John wanted to get closer. He stood just a few feet away from one of the guards. This guard was tall and young, maybe around 25 years old. His name was James Thompson, though John didn't know this. James had been a royal guard for 3 years. "Hey there, buddy," John said loudly. Some nearby tourists turned to look. "That's some hat you've got on. Do you ever get neck pain from holding up that big thing?" The guard didn't move. His eyes stared straight ahead, looking at nothing. His face showed no sign that he heard John at all. A woman standing nearby frowned at John. She was a local named Emma. She had short brown hair and wore a blue jacket. "You shouldn't bother them," Emma said in a quiet voice. They're doing their job. John just smiled at her. I'm just being friendly. Don't worry about it. Emma shook her head but didn't say more. John turned back to the guard. He was having fun now, and a small crowd had started to watch him instead of the palace. Can you even see with that hat covering your eyes? John asked. He waved his hand in front of the guard's face. Hello? Anybody home? James the guard didn't blink. He was used to tourists like John. During his training, other soldiers had shouted in his face, made jokes, and even pinched him. Nothing John did would make him react. That was his job, to stand still no matter what. But John was just getting started. He took out his phone and held it up. Let me take a selfie with you, pal, John said. He stood next to James and made a funny face. Smile for the camera. More tourists gathered around to watch. Some laughed at John's jokes, but others looked uncomfortable. Emma crossed her arms and glared at John. You know, back in America, we don't make our soldiers dress like toy soldiers, John said, speaking louder now. And what's with the red coat? You look like a fancy ketchup bottle. A few people gasped. A little girl asked her mother why the man was being mean to the guard. Emma stepped forward again. That's enough, she said firmly. You're being rude. These guards deserve respect. John laughed. Oh, come on. I'm just having some fun. He doesn't care. Look at him. He's not even listening. But James was listening. He had heard every word. Under his stiff exterior, he felt anger building. Usually, he could ignore tourists like John. But today had been hard. James had just learned that his grandfather, also a former royal guard, had died last night. James couldn't even attend the funeral because of his duty. I bet they hire these guys because they're not smart enough for real jobs, John continued, looking around to see if people were laughing. I mean, who wants to stand around all day like a statue? That was it. Something inside James snapped. For 3 years, he had followed every rule. He had stood in rain and snow. He had missed his sister's wedding. He had endured thousands of tourists taking pictures and making jokes. But today, with grief in his heart, and this loud American insulting not just him but all royal guards, James couldn't stay silent. Slowly, against all his training, James turned his head to look directly at John. The crowd went completely silent. Even John's smile disappeared. No one could believe what was happening. Royal guards never broke character. Never. Oh, John said quietly, suddenly feeling very small. He moved. The silence around Buckingham Palace was thick. Everyone stared at James and John. Tourists raised their phones to record what was happening. This was rare. Royal guards never broke their stance. James looked straight into John's eyes. His face was serious, but his eyes showed both hurt and strength. Sir, James said in a clear, firm voice. Everyone could hear him perfectly. My name is James Thompson. I have served in the British Army for 7 years. 3 of those years, I have been a royal guard. John didn't know what to say. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He had never expected the guard to speak. This uniform, James continued, is not a costume. This hat is not a joke. Men have worn this uniform in battle for hundreds of years. Good men have died wearing it. More people gathered around. Some had their hands over their mouths in shock. A palace official started walking toward them, but stopped when he heard what James was saying. Today, I learned that my grandfather died, James said, his voice still steady. He was also a royal guard, many years ago. He taught me what honor means. He could not attend my ceremony when I became a guard because he was sick. And now, I cannot attend his funeral because I am here, doing my duty. John's face turned red with shame. The joke wasn't funny anymore. He looked at the ground, unable to meet James's eyes. I stand here in rain and cold. I miss birthdays and holidays with my family. I do this because I am proud to serve my country, James said. The least I ask for is basic respect. Emma, The woman who had tried to stop John earlier nodded. Many people in the crowd nodded too. Some even clapped quietly. "I apologize," John said quietly. "I didn't think." "That's the problem, isn't it?" James said. "People don't think about the real person inside this uniform. They see a toy, an attraction, something to laugh at." A senior guard officer was now walking quickly toward them. James knew he would be in trouble. Guards were never supposed to break position or speak to tourists. It was against all the rules. James might lose his position for this. "I understand you're just having fun," James said, his voice softer now. "But perhaps next time, remember that jokes can hurt, even when the person isn't allowed to show it." With that, James turned his head back to the front position. His face became still again. He was back to being the perfect royal guard, as if nothing had happened. The senior officer reached them. He was an older man with gray hair and many medals on his uniform. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, looking between James and John. John swallowed hard. He knew James would get in trouble because of him. James had just shared that his grandfather died, and now he might lose his job too. All because John wanted to show off and make jokes. "No, sir," John said quickly. "No problem at all. I was just leaving." The officer looked suspicious. "Did this guard speak to you?" John thought for a moment. Then he shook his head. "No, sir. I was just talking to myself. This guard has been perfect, completely professional." Emma stepped forward. "That's right," she said. "This tourist was a bit loud, but the guard never responded. I saw everything." Other tourists nodded in agreement. They were all helping to protect James. The officer looked around at the crowd, then at James, who stood perfectly still, then back at John. "Very well," he said finally. "Please keep a respectful distance from the guards." "Sir." John nodded. "Yes, sir. I will." As the officer walked away, John looked at James one more time. The guard's eyes were fixed straight ahead, showing nothing. But for a brief second, so quick that John almost missed it, James blinked twice. It was a thank you. John walked away from the palace grounds with his head down. For the first time in years, he felt truly ashamed. Emma, the local woman, walked beside him. Neither spoke for a while. "Thank you for helping back there," John finally said as they reached the main street. "You didn't have to do that." Emma nodded. "I didn't do it for you. I did it for him." She pointed back toward the palace. "He seemed like he's going through enough already." John sighed. "Yeah, I really messed up, didn't I?" "Yes, you did," Emma said honestly. "But you also tried to fix it. That counts for something." They stopped at a small coffee shop near the palace. John offered to buy Emma a cup of tea as thanks. She agreed, though she still seemed unsure about him. "I don't get it," John said as they sat down with their drinks. "Why do people become royal guards? Standing still all day, not allowed to talk or move. It sounds awful." Emma stirred her tea. "It's about honor and tradition. Some of these guards come from families where their fathers, grandfathers, and great-grandfathers all served. Like James mentioned about his grandfather." John thought about this. In America, his own father had owned the car dealership before him. John had taken over the family business and was proud of it. Maybe it wasn't so different. "I guess I never thought about it that way," he admitted. "Back home, I'm known for being funny. People expect jokes from me. It's kind of my thing." "There's nothing wrong with humor," Emma said. "But there's a difference between laughing with someone and laughing at them." John nodded slowly. Her words hit him hard. "You know," Emma continued, "there's a pub not far from here where off-duty guards sometimes go after their shifts. Some of them might be there tonight." John looked up. "Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" Emma shrugged. "Maybe you could see the person behind the uniform, and maybe offer a proper apology." That evening, John found himself standing outside the Royal Arms pub. He almost turned around and left 3 times before finally pushing open the door. The pub was warm and crowded. Men and women in regular clothes filled the tables, their loud voices and laughter filling the air. John didn't know how he would find James in this crowd. He didn't even know if James would be here. But then he spotted a table in the corner where 4 young men sat together. Something about the way they sat, straight-backed and alert even while relaxing, told John they were soldiers. Taking a deep breath, John walked over. As he got closer, he recognized James among them. The guard looked different out of uniform, younger, more relaxed, but still with that same serious look in his eyes. The conversation at the table stopped as John approached. James looked up and immediately recognized John. His friends noticed the change in James's face and turned to look at the American. Hi," John said awkwardly. "I don't know if you remember me from earlier today." "The tourist with the jokes," James said calmly. "Hard to forget." John shifted uncomfortably. The other guards were staring at him now. One of them, a big man with a buzz cut, started to stand up. James put a hand on his friend's arm to stop him. "I came to apologize properly," John said quickly. "What I did was disrespectful. I didn't understand what that uniform means or what you guys go through." James studied John's face for a long moment. The pub seemed to get quieter around them, though it was probably just in John's head. Finally, James pointed to an empty chair at their table. "Sit down," he said. "Buy us a round, and we'll call it even." John quickly went to the bar and ordered 5 beers. His hand shook a little as he carried them back to the table. He felt like he was walking into the lion's den. The guards watched him as he set the drinks down. "Thanks," James said, taking a beer. The other guards nodded but didn't smile. "I'm John Miller," John said, sitting down in the empty chair. "From Chicago." "James Thompson," James replied, though John already knew his name. "And these are my mates, Charlie, Rob, and Doug. All Royal Guards." The big man with the buzz cut was Rob. He still looked at John with narrow eyes. "So you're the funny man from the palace today," he said. "James told us about you." John took a sip of his beer to hide his discomfort. "Not my finest moment," he admitted. "Did you know," Charlie said, leaning forward, "that James here broke a 200-year tradition by speaking to you today? No guard has ever done that at the main palace post." John felt even worse. "I'm really sorry about that. You didn't get in trouble, did you?" James shook his head. "Thanks to you and that woman covering for me, no. But word still got around. My captain wants to see me tomorrow morning." "Will you lose your position?" John asked, worried. "Probably not," James said. "But I might get the worst shifts for the next few months." Doug, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "James told us about his grandfather, too. The funeral is tomorrow." He looked at John with accusing eyes. "He can't go because he has to meet with the captain instead." John put down his beer. "That's terrible. It's all my fault." "Not entirely," James said, surprising everyone. "I chose to speak. I broke the rules. No one forced me." They sat in awkward silence for a minute. Then John asked, "What was your grandfather like?" James's face softened. He pulled out his phone and showed John a photo of an older man in full guard uniform, standing proud. "William Thompson. Served for 30 years. He was at the palace when the Queen was crowned. Said it was the proudest day of his life." "He sounds like an amazing man," John said sincerely. "He was," James agreed. "He's the reason I became a guard. When I was little, I would practice standing still for hours, trying to be just like him." John listened as James told stories about his grandfather, how he had once stood guard during a terrible storm when lightning struck just yards away, how he had met and charmed James's grandmother while in uniform, how he had taught James to polish boots until they shined like mirrors. As James talked, his friends added their own stories. Charlie's father had also been a guard. Rob had dreamed of becoming one since he was 5 years old. Doug was the first in his family to serve, and his parents had cried with pride at his ceremony. John began to understand. These weren't just men doing a boring job. They were carrying on a proud tradition. They were part of something bigger than themselves, something that had meaning. "You know," John said when there was a pause, "back home, I'm known for my jokes. I own a car dealership and make funny TV commercials. People expect me to be the funny guy all the time." "There's nothing wrong with being funny," James said. "Just know when it's the right time for jokes." Rob, who had been cold to John, finally cracked a small smile. "Besides, if you want to see something truly funny, you should see Doug here try to dance after a few more beers." Everyone laughed, even John. The tension at the table finally broke. "Another round," John offered. "It's the least I can do." As John went to the bar again, he felt different. These guards weren't toys or tourist attractions. They were real people with lives, dreams, and stories. And now, they were sharing those stories with him. The evening went on, and John found himself enjoying the company of the Royal Guards. They shared more stories, and even Rob, the big guard who had been cold to John at first, was now laughing at some of John's jokes. "So what time is your meeting with the captain tomorrow?" John asked James during a quiet moment. 9 in the morning, James replied, "and my grandfather's funeral is at 11. In Essex, about an hour from here." John thought for a moment. What if you could go to both? James shook his head. "Not possible. The meeting will take at least 2 hours, and then I'm on duty right after." John leaned forward. "What if I went with you to the meeting? I could tell your captain it was all my fault, that I was being a terrible tourist, and you only spoke to stop me from causing more trouble." The guards looked at John with surprise. "You would do that?" James asked. "Of course," John said. "It's the truth anyway. And maybe if your captain knows the full story, he'll let you attend the funeral." Charlie shook his head. "The captain follows the rules strictly. Even with your help, I'm not sure he would make an exception." John wouldn't give up. There must be a way. "Can someone else take your shift tomorrow?" "I already asked," James said. "Everyone is either on duty or has the day off." "What about your day off? Couldn't you switch with someone?" John asked. "My next day off is Thursday. The funeral can't wait that long," James explained. They all sat quietly, thinking. Then Doug spoke up. "Wait, what about Peterson? He owes you for covering his Christmas shift last year." James's eyes widened. "You're right, but he's on the night watch tonight. I'd need to ask him before morning." "So let's go ask him now," John said, standing up. "Where is he?" "At the Tower of London. He's on duty until 2 a.m., Rob explained. John looked at his watch. It was already 10:30 p.m. Then we should hurry. The 5 men left the pub and took a taxi to the Tower of London. The famous old castle was closed to tourists, but the guards knew a side entrance where they could talk to the night staff. "We can't just walk up to Peterson while he's on duty," James explained to John as they approached the tower. "We'll have to wait until his break." They waited outside in the cool night air. John bought hot coffees for everyone from a late-night stand nearby. As they waited, John asked more questions about the life of a royal guard. "The hardest part is standing still for so long," Charlie told him. "Your legs go numb after the first hour." "And the tourists," Rob added. "Some are respectful, but others." "Like me," John said with a sad smile. "Like you were," James corrected him. "You're different now." At midnight, a guard came out for his break. James went to talk to him while the others waited. John could see them speaking seriously, with James doing most of the talking. Finally, they shook hands, and James came back to the group. "Peterson will take my shift tomorrow," James said with a big smile. "He says it's the least he can do after I covered for him at Christmas." The guards all cheered quietly, mindful of the late hour. John felt a warm feeling inside. He had helped make this happen. "That's great news," John said. "But what about your captain? You still have that meeting?" "Yes," James nodded. "And I want you to come with me, if you're still willing. It might help explain things." "I'll be there," John promised. As they walked back to find a taxi, James put a hand on John's shoulder. "Thank you," he said simply. "My grandfather would have appreciated this." John nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Just 2 days ago, he had been making fun of these men and their tradition. Now he was helping one of them honor his grandfather. Life could change so quickly. The next morning, John woke up early in his hotel room. He put on his best clothes, a clean white shirt and dark blue pants. No funny Hawaiian shirts today. This was serious. He even left his Chicago Cubs cap in the room. He met James outside the palace at 8:45 a.m. James was in his full uniform, looking perfect as always, but John could see worry in his eyes. "Ready?" John asked. James nodded. "Captain Brooks is tough but fair. Just tell the truth." They walked together to a small office building near the palace. Guards in regular uniforms, not the red ceremonial ones, nodded at James as they passed. Many gave curious looks at John. Captain Brooks was a tall, older man with gray hair and many medals on his chest. His office was small and neat, with pictures of the royal family on the walls. He stood up when James and John entered. "Guard Thompson," he said in a stern voice, "and you must be the American tourist I've heard about." "Yes, sir," John said, feeling nervous. "John Miller." "Sit down, both of you," Captain Brooks ordered. The captain looked at some papers on his desk. "So, Thompson, you broke the most important rule yesterday. You spoke to a tourist while on duty. You moved from your position. You showed emotion." He looked up at James. "In 25 years, I've never had a guard do all three at once." James sat very straight. "Yes, sir. I have no excuse." "Sir." "Actually," John interrupted, "he does have a reason. I was being terrible. I made jokes about his uniform. I tried to make him move. I was disrespectful." The captain turned to John. "Mr. Miller, what Guard Thompson did was still against all rules. No matter how rude a tourist is, guards must stay still and silent." "But his grandfather had just died," John said. "And I said the uniform wasn't important. I insulted everything he cares about." Captain Brooks raised his eyebrows and looked at James. "Is this true? About your grandfather?" "Yes, sir," James said quietly. "William Thompson, former Royal Guard. He passed away 2 days ago." The captain's face softened slightly. "I knew William. A fine soldier and a good man." He paused. "The funeral is today." "Yes, sir." "At 11 in Essex," James replied. Captain Brooks looked at his watch, then back at the papers on his desk. He was quiet for a long moment. "What you did was still wrong, Thompson," he finally said. "There must be consequences." James nodded. "I understand, sir." 2 weeks of night duty at the tower, the captain continued. "Starting tomorrow." James accepted this punishment without complaint. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir." "As for today," Captain Brooks said, looking at his watch again, "I believe you have arrangements to make. Peterson has agreed to take your shift." James looked surprised. "Sir, does that mean?" "It means you're dismissed, Thompson," the captain said firmly. "Go honor your grandfather. Be back for duty tomorrow night." James stood up straight and saluted. "Thank you, sir." As they left the office, John couldn't believe what had just happened. "He's letting you go to the funeral." James smiled, a real smile that John had never seen before. "He is, and the punishment isn't bad at all. Night duty is actually peaceful. No tourists." They walked out into the sunlight. James looked at his watch. "I have just enough time to get to Essex if I leave now." "Do you need a ride?" John offered. "I could rent a car." James shook his head. "My sister is picking me up." He paused. "Would you like to come to the funeral?" John was surprised. "Me? But I never knew your grandfather." "No," James agreed, "but you helped make sure I could be there. My grandfather valued respect and doing the right thing. You've shown both." John felt honored. "I would be proud to come." As they waited for James's sister, John thought about how much had changed in just 2 days. He had come to London looking for fun. Instead, he found something more important: respect, honor, and maybe even a new friend. James's sister arrived in a small black car. She looked surprised when James told her John would be coming too, but she smiled and made room. "This is Sarah," James said as they got into the car. "Sarah, this is John. He's the reason I can come today." Sarah looked at John with new interest. "James told me about a rude American tourist yesterday. That was you." John nodded, embarrassed. "I'm afraid so. But I'm trying to make up for it now." The drive to Essex took just over an hour. John sat in the back seat and listened as James and Sarah talked about their grandfather. They told stories about his strict rules at family dinners, his love for gardening, and how he taught all his grandchildren to stand up straight. "He would have been proud of you yesterday," Sarah told James, "standing up for what you believe in." "Even though I broke the rules?" James asked. "Sometimes the right thing isn't in the rule book," Sarah replied. They arrived at a small church surrounded by green fields. Many cars were already parked outside. Men and women in dark clothes stood in small groups, talking quietly. "Most of these people are former or current guards," James explained to John. "Grandfather was well respected." Inside the church, flowers surrounded a wooden coffin. On top of it lay a royal guard's red coat, carefully folded, and the tall black hat. John felt a lump in his throat. These symbols meant so much more to him now than they had just days ago. The service was simple and beautiful. A minister spoke about William Thompson's life of service. 3 former guards who had served with William shared memories. Then James stood up to speak. "My grandfather taught me what honor means," James said in a clear voice. "He showed me that standing still can be harder than moving, that silence can be stronger than words, and that duty is not just what you do, but who you are." John watched as James spoke with pride about his grandfather. The young guard stood tall and spoke clearly, just as he had when he confronted John at the palace. But today there was no anger in his voice, only love and respect. After the service, people gathered at the Thompson family home for food and drinks. John felt out of place at first, a stranger at a family event. But James made sure to introduce him to everyone. "This is my friend John. From America," James would say. Friend. The word surprised John every time he heard it. An older man in a wheelchair approached them. He wore many medals on his jacket. "Colonel Harris," James said with respect. "Thank you for coming." "William was one of my best," the colonel said. "He would have been proud of you, James." He looked at John. "And who is this?" "This is John Miller," James explained. "He's the reason I could be here today." Colonel Harris studied John with sharp eyes. "Really? How so?" John told the story honestly, not leaving out his bad behavior at the palace. "I learned an important lesson about respect," he finished. The colonel nodded. "Good. Not everyone can admit when they're wrong." He turned to James. "Your grandfather always said the true test of a man is not whether he makes mistakes, but how he fixes them." As the afternoon went on, John met more guards and their families. He heard more stories about William Thompson and the proud tradition of the Royal Guards. Each story helped him understand James better. When it was time to leave, Sarah offered to drive John back to London. "Actually," James said, "I was thinking we could all go together. John leaves tomorrow, and I thought we might show him a proper English dinner tonight. If you're free?" John smiled. "I'd like that very much." 1 year later, John Miller returned to London. This time, his wife Jane came with him. They checked into the same hotel John had stayed in before, but everything else was different. Are you sure they'll remember you? Jane asked as they walked toward Buckingham Palace. It's been a whole year. James and I have been emailing, John explained. He knows we're coming. The palace looked the same as before, big, beautiful, and full of tourists. John felt strange standing among the crowd again, remembering his bad behavior from last year. That's where it happened, he told Jane, pointing to a guard post. That's where I learned my lesson. The guard at that post wasn't James. It was a young woman, standing still and staring straight ahead. John kept a respectful distance as he took a photo. John Miller, a voice called. John turned to see Emma, the local woman who had tried to stop his rude behavior last year. I thought that was you. Emma. Great to see you, John said, introducing her to Jane. Emma helped me see the error of my ways last year. Emma smiled. I hear you and James became friends after all that. We did, John nodded. We're meeting him tonight after his shift. They walked together for a while, Emma showing them parts of London that regular tourists don't see. Then Emma had to leave for work, and John and Jane continued exploring the city. That evening, they went to the Royal Arms pub. James was already there, sitting with Rob and Charlie. They stood up when John and Jane entered. The famous John Miller returns to London, Rob said with a big smile, shaking John's hand. And this must be the lovely Jane we've heard about, Charlie added. Jane looked at John with surprise. You really did make friends with the royal guards. They spent the evening talking and laughing. Jane heard the whole story again, from both sides this time. She couldn't believe her husband had behaved so badly, or that it had turned into such a wonderful friendship. So, what brings you back to London? James asked as the night went on. Just tourism again. John smiled. Actually, I have some business here too. He reached into his pocket and pulled out some papers. My car dealership is starting a student exchange program with a London college. 2 British students will come work for me each summer to learn the car business, and I'll send 2 American students here. That's wonderful, James said. How did this happen? After I met you guys, I realized how little Americans know about British culture, and probably the other way around too, John explained. I thought this might help bridge that gap. James looked impressed. From insulting a guard to creating an international program. That's quite a change in 1 year. The program needed a name, John continued. I hope you don't mind, but I called it the William Thompson Memorial Exchange. James went quiet. His eyes filled with emotion. You named it after my grandfather. John nodded. A man who valued duty, honor, and doing the right thing seemed like the perfect namesake. Wait, Jane said, looking confused. You never told me that part. Who's going to run this program here in London? John smiled at his wife, then looked at James. Well, that's what I wanted to talk to James about tonight. James raised his eyebrows. Me? But I'm a royal guard. For now, John said, but your service ends in 6 months, right? You'll need a new job. And who better to teach British tradition and respect than a former royal guard? James looked stunned. Then slowly he began to smile. From enemies to business partners, Rob laughed. Who would have believed it? I would, Charlie said, raising his glass. After all, anything is possible when a royal guard breaks 200 years of silence to teach one tourist a lesson he'll never forget. They all raised their glasses. To William Thompson, John said. To new beginnings, James added. Jane looked around at these men who had once been strangers and were now friends. To the unbelievable response that changed everything.